Hey everybody, this is Caleb, part of the Narrate team. Today is part 1 of a 4-part series called We Need You to Lead. We Need You to Lead is a series that talks about the importance of how leadership is central to living life well. This week, Adam talks about how our leadership opportunities are on loan.
This morning, we're starting a new conversation that's really rooted in this idea that the opportunities to lead abound, and yet they're so often missed, and oftentimes missed because we don't carry the title of leader, because we don't feel like we're in some kind of position of leader, because no one's ever told us a leader. We think that that's something that elites do, and we're just the rest of them. And so this morning, we're going to kick off this conversation that kind of assumes the exact opposite, if you will. And all of that is kind of rooted or more or less found in a particular story that I read about World War II. You remember, of course, the Bataan Death March, one of the more horrific moments of World War II. Survivors of the Bataan Death March were succinctly marched right into a POW camp. And in that camp, as was the case throughout World War II, that these soldiers were completely starved. They became quite emaciated. That they were abused both physically and mentally. That it was an incredibly trying time. And in one particular moment, the leader of this POW camp kind of arbitrarily decided that it was time to execute some of the soldiers, some of the prisoners. And his plan, as though the camp wasn't horrific enough, his plan was to kill them by simply suffocating them in the hull of what they called a hell ship. And so at his directive, they marched, I don't know, tens, hundreds, I'm not exactly sure how many of these soldiers into the hull of a hell ship. And they latched it. And these otherwise incredibly brave and incredibly powerful men who had been reduced in so many different inhumane forms that they just started to panic. And as they started to panic, they started to scream. And of course, the only resource they had at this particular juncture was oxygen. And in the process of screaming, they were just using that up all the more rapidly. And at one point, a guy by the name of Frank Bridget, he found the railing, he found the stairs, he made his way up the stairs, that was exiting the whole ship, but he couldn't get out of it. He made his way up it as far as he could, and with a certain tone, he just simply said to the guys, if we don't stop, we all die. And survivors would later tell oral historians that there was something about his tone that just absolutely demanded respect. And I don't remember precisely what he said, but it was something to the effect of, listen, if we continue to panic and we continue to scream, we're toast. The only way we survive this thing is by calming down and working together. Now, what's interesting is Frank Bridget wasn't a decorated officer. In fact, he wasn't an officer at all. In fact, the survivors would say he wasn't even liked. That if you were to line up all the men in the hull of that ship and ask them, who do you like the most, he would have been last on the list. One man described him as consistently irritable. He said he was the type of guy who consistently rubbed you the wrong way. And yet there was something about that moment, something about this moment. As one of the survivors said, history often demands that someone step up and lead. And in that moment, Frank Bridget just did what history demanded someone do. That, to me, captures the thrust behind this series. I got to say that because of what I get to do, one of my very favorite things to do is study leadership. In fact, I'll say that I often get more out of reading leadership books than I do theology books, because I find the parallels between leadership wisdom and Scripture and Jesus just so incredibly striking. If you were to think about leadership, you might think of it as something for elevated elites. But isn't the truth that each and every one of us gets a chance to lead every day? And let's just clarify, I'm not talking about the type of opinionated, obtrusive, always telling somebody what to do. I'm talking about the tactful type of leadership that knows when to speak and when to be silent and when to take the high road and when to shut your mouth. That type. Aren't we all called to lead on occasion? And furthermore, maybe even more importantly, aren't we all at times desperate for good leadership? Think back to your childhood. Think back to your early career years. Isn't there evidence all over your life that you need people to lead? In fact, here's a thought. Like, think back of one of those positive moments in life where you faced a decision, one of those proverbial like forks in the road, and you had to go left and you had to go right, and you made a decision, and now today you are so thankful you made that decision, like you made the right decision. You got one of those? You know, like you enrolled for school and you weren't going to go to school, or you took the job, or you moved to a city, or you didn't move to the city, or you ended a relationship, or you know those types of moments? The ones where you go like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't buy that house. I'm so glad I didn't sign that mortgage. I'm so glad I broke up with her. Like, got one of those in your head? I'll bet you at that proverbial intersection, I'll bet it's more than just like facts. I'll bet it's more than just like this job or this city or that city. I'll bet you there's a face. I'll bet you there's a voice. Like someone who called you to make the courageous decision, someone who pointed you to go in a direction, someone who challenged you in a way no one else would, someone who just said just the right thing, maybe a teacher, maybe a coach, maybe a fellow student. If we have those moments. I was thinking about it this week myself and just kind of trying to identify a couple of those, and one of them that comes to mind, and it typifies to me the irony of this whole conversation. Because it was a time when a friend and I were sitting in one of those cool booths at the Merc, you know, the ones you can never get, so you never go there because you never get them. But when you do get them, it's like, wow, I hit the lottery. Got one? You with me? And we were sitting in one of those booths, and I don't even know how it came up, and it certainly wasn't anywhere near as dramatic as even telling the story from a stage makes it sound. But he began to say, like, Adam, you could get out of debt. I was like, what do you mean get out of debt? Like, you don't have to have this plan to pay off your student loans over the next 10 years. You don't have to have a second mortgage so that you have a house, because that was back in those. You don't have to do this. And he knew enough about me and our finances to go like, it'd just take you a few years. And my head is like, wait a minute. So you're telling me empty my savings to get out of debt? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I went home only because of who he was, and Teresa and I started to talk about this, and it was really uncomfortable. And here's my point. Today, I know this sounds weird. Trust me, I'm not wealthy, but I'm also not in want. And today, you'd be hard-pressed to point me to a moment in the last 5 years that translated more to the quality of our lives today. You cannot like that. You cannot give here again, whatever. But seriously, like that decision to get out of, I mean, I can't tell you how it's changed the tone of our conversations as a family, the fights we don't have, everything that Teresa's been able to do with Families with Heart in Ecuador. It's all rooted in that moment. And yet there was no drama. He didn't like wake up and go, I'm going to be a great leader today. It's just seizing a moment that God gave him. I was thinking of another one, when my friend Vern, who at the time was my boss, and I was 21 years old, and I was so critical and such a know-it-all, and what I didn't understand about my creative side of my brain was like that it needed all those things, but it needed to be reined in. And he sat across the table from me after a mission trip that I co-led with his best friend, and his best friend got home from that trip and said, that guy is an idiot. You should fire him. All he does is complain. That's not an exaggeration. And Vern started to confront me on that, and I started to push back, and it's one of my only memories of him hitting the table, and he said, Adam, it's got to stop. Like, you either work on this or find a new place to work. Now, was he the only person in my life who ever understood that I was incredibly critical? No way. But he was the only one that had the courage to go, it's a problem. And even this week, I was reading some stuff about creativity and leadership and understanding that it requires a brain that kind of is critical, but it also requires discipline, doesn't it? In fact, if you were to think back also, like, so we've done the positive thing, now think of the negative ones. Like those moments where you're just like, why did I do that? Maybe God's redeemed it. Maybe you've sought his forgiveness for it. Maybe this morning will be the morning that you'll do that because God doesn't want you to live in shame. But if you think of those moments, you got in the car and that was your blood alcohol content, or you did that and that ended that relationship, those moments you so deeply regret, same deal. I'll bet you when you look back at the intersection, another person is there. And maybe it was silent. Or maybe they were there and they didn't lead well. But the fact of the matter is, very few of our decisions, good or bad, are they born by ourselves. Like, someone had a chance. I was thinking this week of a moment, and I got to be careful here because I don't want to be a victim, neither do you, right? Like, that's what Jesus helps us with. You're an idiot, you're not a victim. But I was thinking of this moment when, he says that in the most enduring of ways too, right? But if the only thing we confessed was that we're prone to feel like a victim, well, okay, anyway, so here we go. So I was thinking of the negative side of that for me, and it brought me to my freshman year. It was the spring of my freshman year. I can still remember the varsity basketball coach pulled me out of class. We were sitting on this bench right by the main office, and he looked at me and he said, "Adam, are you going to play basketball this summer?" And I said, "No, I'm going to play Legion baseball. Don't think I'll have time for summer basketball." Now, he said, "Okay, well, no sense in coming out next year." I said, "Okay," and we got up and left. Now, that's like, okay, so there's that, but the context was the summer before my parents had divorced. And when they divorced, and I'm not blaming anybody for anything, when they divorced, my mom moved to Kalispell. My dad was in a relationship. He was busy. My sister was a senior. I had more freedom and more license than I ever had in my life. And I quickly discovered over the course of that summer that it's really easy to get popular in high school if you can just drink a lot of Bud Light. And so that's what I was doing. And so I wasn't a great basketball player. I wasn't even a great athlete. But when I was in 6th and 7th and 8th grade, I was one of the better basketball players because I was big for my age and I loved basketball. That was my life. I worked hard. More context, he wasn't just the varsity basketball coach. His son was one of my better friends growing up. He was Bruce. He wasn't just Mr. Robertson. And in fact, he knew the story. I'd spent the night at his house. I'd gone to high school basketball tournaments with him. You know how bad, and again, I'm not blaming him, but you know how bad I wish he would have looked at me and said, "Adam, like, what the heck are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? Would he have been taking a chance? Yes. Would it might have resulted in my German father ending up in his office and giving him the what for? Could have. But I so wish, and I so think of like, I was never going to play college basketball. I was probably never going to start as a senior in basketball. But I so wish he would have like put his arm around me and went, "Hey, why don't you come over for dinner tonight? And can I just paint a picture of like the path you're on and the path you were on a year ago and which one you're going to like more when you're 19 years old?" So really this series, we think it's kind of a brand that we'll return to because I think following Jesus involves the courage to lead and the courage to lead others. And to find a way to do that that's not, what can I say, prickish, like that's kind and spirit-led and not know-it-all, but also not weak and pansy and like I don't want to make anybody mad and I don't want to lose any friendships. There's a fine line there, isn't there? And so this morning we're just going to jump into one principle. And this one, okay, so let me say this. If you're a guest with us and maybe your friend invited you and they said, "Hey, it's helpful and challenging and engaging no matter what you believe about Jesus," and we work hard to create experiences to that end, this morning's principle is pretty foundational. It's not pretty foundational. It is foundational. And to be honest with you, it's a little bit more Christian, so to speak, than probably anything we've talked about in a while. Like it's going to be hard to go like, okay, I can do that even though I reject God. Like that's going to be hard. But here's the good news, if I can just kind of speak to the discomfort that you might feel as we move forward, is the message, as we're going to look at it, because we're going to look at these stories from the book of Daniel, the original hearers of the message, they were just like any of you who believe in God but aren't sure what to do with Jesus. And the degree to which you go like, wow, like this isn't a baby step. This would take a giant leap for me in my worldview. That's the thing that guys like Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus and these other guys had to deal with. So what we're going to deal with this morning is a story from the book of Daniel. I think we're going to read more scripture than we've ever read at Narrate Church, just to prove that I do have a Bible. The context, though, of Daniel, if you want to flip there, we're going to start in Daniel 4, but the context is important. See, at this time, we're dealing with about 580 BC. It's a while ago. And the context of this time in this part of the world, in this part of history, is the nation of Israel didn't exist. They'd been destroyed. Not only had the nation of Israel been destroyed, the government disbanded, their best and brightest hauled off to Babylon so that they could train in the Babylonian system so that when they did lead, they led in that direction, not in the Jewish nation direction. But the temple had also been destroyed. And so in this day, in this part of the world, if your temple was destroyed, your God was destroyed. Which is an interesting point because like most of these people, they knew about this God of Israel. They knew about Egypt. They heard about the Pharaoh. They heard about, the plagues. They heard all that. And then he was defeated by the Babylonians, by a god named Marduk. And thus the assumption in this day would have been that either that god died, which is hard for us to conceive of, but it's conceivable in their thinking about spiritual things. Either he had died, or he somehow had been defeated, or he just kind of met his match and he wasn't strong enough for the god Marduk. Now what we know from Scripture is that what God was doing was he was disciplining his people. But as he was disciplining his people, he was also teaching the world a lesson. He wanted everyone else to know it. That's us, like the Gentiles, the Goyim. He wanted everyone else to catch this one simple lesson. And this lesson, like if we could get our hearts around it, like have you ever seen a leader who started off so kind and became such a jerk? Ever seen leadership ruin somebody? Ever seen power corrupt somebody? I don't think power corrupts. I think power just gives you the full ability to be who your character already is. But like if we could get our hearts around this, I think we could begin to understand why we can start so well and finish so poorly. There's this one idea. Now, in this day, Nebuchadnezzar was the king. And he was the king of what would have been the most, if not the top 2 or 3 most powerful nations in the world. And things were going really, really well for them. If they wanted to destroy that nation, they destroyed it. If they wanted to defeat that god, they defeated it. If they wanted to eat that food, he ate it. And in fact, we're going to pick up in Daniel 4. It says this, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, contented and prosperous. Isn't that what you say on Sunday afternoons? I'm in my palace, contented and prosperous. I had a dream that made me afraid. Now, the dream was this. You can go back and read it in your time this week. The dream was of this massive tree. And as the dream says, the tree reached the heavens. And so it was this gigantic tree. It was beautiful. It was lush. There was tons of fruit on this tree. And in fact, in the dream, all the animals of the earth, they just existed underneath the shade of the tree. So every animal on the planet just depended upon this tree for its shade and its survival. Hard to appreciate the value of shade until you go to Israel in July and experience the scorching heat and the sagebrush, and like you kind of lay your head next to the bush, and that's the only shade that you could get. So he has this dream. And this dream represents power. It represents influence. And then he hears a voice say, cut the tree down. Remove its branches. Get rid of its fruit. Destroy the beauty. Destroy the food. Cut it down. And bind it with iron and with bronze. And then he hears a voice say this. The decision is announced by the messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict so that the living may know. And now here it is. Here's the one thing. We're just going to come back to it over and over because Daniel comes back to it over and over and over. Now, here's the one thing he wants Nebuchadnezzar to get. That the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth. And he gives them to anyone he wishes. Now, whether you're a Christ follower or not, you might go like, wow, that's a tough one for me to accept. And it's the theme. Nebuchadnezzar, I want you to get that the Most High is ruler over everything. And he gives them to whoever he wishes. Nebuchadnezzar, I want you to know that your power is on loan. Your influence has been given to you. Now, Nebuchadnezzar wakes up, and this is kind of hard for me to understand why, probably hard for you, but he wakes up and he doesn't understand the meaning of the dream. Because this is what we do, right? We get a message we don't like, and we go, I don't get it. Let me find somebody who tells me what I want to hear. And so he calls in his friend Daniel. And Daniel is this Jewish man who's well-respected and quite intelligent. And Daniel comes into the room, and he tells Daniel, like, hey, Daniel, I'm going to lay down on this long leather couch thing, and I'm going to explain to you my vision. And then I want you to tell me, maybe even does the George pose with me, Seinfeld, anybody? And I want you to tell me the meaning of this dream. And in fact, if you read the story, it gets to the point where Daniel actually starts comforting Nebuchadnezzar. Like, Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel starts freaking out. And Nebuchadnezzar starts comforting Daniel. Like, no, Daniel, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And finally, Daniel says, no, it's not going to be okay. And then he says this is the interpretation. Your Majesty, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against my Lord the King. You will be driven away from the people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that, and here we go, that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth, and he gives them to anyone he wishes. And then he continues, your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. See, Daniel says, Nebuchadnezzar, God is going to teach you something. Not your God, not Marduk, not the God you don't believe in, not the God you defeated, the God of Israel. He wants you to know something. In fact, he wants everyone to know something. And what he wants them to know is simply this, heaven rules. Now, this is an idea that was first introduced to me years ago from Andy Stanley, and he's taught it from several different angles. But his paraphrase of this whole story, I think, is absolutely brilliant. It's simply this. Go ahead. Leadership is a stewardship. It's temporary, and you're accountable. See, stewardship means it's given to you by someone else. Stewardship means it's not yours. You don't need me to tell you what temporary means, but temporary means like someday your kids are going to move out of the house and then they get to choose whether or not they respect you. Like temporary. Like it's not forever. Accountable, you're going to answer. See, what Daniel is pointing out to Nebuchadnezzar, what God is pointing out to Nebuchadnezzar is leadership is a gift. That his leadership was on loan. And that someday he's going to be called to account for how he used that gift. Now, from here in the story, Daniel begs Nebuchadnezzar to repent. And you would think that he would, and yet what happens is he doesn't, and the story picks up a year later. It says this, 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, this is you in the morning in your bathrobe. Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? Now, there's part of it that wants to go like, what is happening here, Nebuchadnezzar? Like, how could you forget? How could you forget? Like, it's only been 12 months. How did you forget the vision? Like, God has gracefully not let that happen yet. How do you forget that? But we forget, don't we? He forgets. I forget. You forget that the Most High is sovereign over everything on the planet, everything in the universe, and he gives it to whoever he wishes. How do you do this? I don't know. I think we all do it. Even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. Translation, it's over. The clock is up. You're done. This God that you don't even claim to believe in, this God who you don't even respect his authority, he's coming back. He's cashing in. He's asking you to account for what you've done with what he's given you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge. Let me just say this one together. That the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth. And he gives them to anyone he wishes. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. Nebuchadnezzar, historically, he completely loses his mind. You can read about it even on Wikipedia. And things go really, really south for him. And then eventually, and here's what's fascinating to me, the story comes back to Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of earth. No one can hold back his hand and say to him, "What have you done?" So this wealthy, powerful king of Babylon, he comes to the conclusion that the Most High God of Israel reigns over all the kingdoms of the world, and he gives them to whoever he wishes. Now, what's fascinating is even like go to the library and open the history books, what we know is that this story became a part of the legend of Nebuchadnezzar. It became a part of the construct, their story as a people. It became a part of his household that he understood, and for a season, they all seemed to live and lead and understand this very principle. That the power they have, the authority they have, the influence they have, the resource they have, the talents they have, for whatever reason, God has given it to them to use in this season. And yet then you fast forward 40 years, and 40 years later, things are unraveling again. Now this gets a little complicated, but 40 years later, or just shy of 40 years, because we're going to have to work up quickly to 40 years, Nabonidus was the king of Babylon. And Nabonidus did something that no king that we know of from this era had ever done before or has ever done since. He retired. See, like kings get conquered, kings get killed, kings get pulled from authority, their sons take them out, lots of things happen to kings, but kings don't retire. But Nabonidus, he decided that he wanted to take it easy. And so he literally gave over his power to another person, and he retired to an oasis. And simultaneously, Cyrus of Persia was rising to power. And the Persians were slowly dwarfing the power of the Babylonians. In fact, Cyrus of Persia, if he wanted them, he took them. If he wanted it, he had it. If he wanted to eat it, he ate it. If he wanted to beat them in a war, he beat them. And while Nabonidus was having an oasis, and Belshazzar was then the king of Babylon, Cyrus of Persia was getting more and more threatening to the city of Babylon. And so Nabonidus, he raised an army. Came out of retirement, coming back for his comeback tour. Got his army on some hill a couple miles removed from Babylon. He battled Cyrus, king of Persia, and it was no contest. Kind of like games 5 and 6 of the World Series. Just not even a game. Just over. Cashed in before it was over. And in fact, that very night, Nabonidus was killed. And that was 2 miles away. 2 days later, Cyrus, king of Persia, arrived at the walls of Babylon. 2 days later, while Belshazzar was hanging out inside the walls of Babylon, Cyrus, king of Persia, was setting up a siege around the city. Now, the thinking among Belshazzar and the people of Babylonia was that the walls of Babylon could not be crumbled. That it was absolutely, it was an absolute win. Like, nobody could get through these walls. Nobody could breach the walls. There's the word I'm looking for. And to demonstrate just how confident he was in the walls and just how confident he was in his god Marduk, Belshazzar threw a party. He threw this giant party in this giant banquet room. And in the room, he put Marduk, the idol to Marduk. And next to Marduk, he put all the idols of all the nations and all the countries and all the city-states that they had destroyed, all these tribal gods. And it was a complete mockery. All the nobles and all the rich people and his wives and his concubines and everybody who was anybody in his mind was partying, and they were mocking all these other idols. And then when someone points out to him, like, hey, wait a minute, where's the God of Israel? And the answer, of course, is the God of Israel doesn't have an idol. He doesn't like that. And so he says, okay, I got an idea. And he sends his attendants to the place where they hold all the wealth. Can't think of that word either right now. But he sends them to this room, the safe, if you will. And he has them retrieve the gold goblets from the temple. And presumably the utensils and all the dinnerware that would have been used in the sacrifices from the temple. And he brings it back to the party. And people proceed to get drunk from the sacred instruments from the Jewish temple. There's this party raging. All the while, Cyrus, king of Persia, and his massive army, like the hottest army going right now, is assembling outside the city walls and threatening to conquer this great city. And they're just partying. And then, and this is such a grace of God coincidence because we didn't plan it this way, but it's the ultimate Halloween passage, then a hand appears on the wall. Do you remember this story? It's literally, I looked it up. My wife said, I bet you that's where it comes from, but don't quote me. And I said, okay, I'll look it up, and then I'll quote you. It's literally the statement, like the handwriting's on the wall. It's from there. Because remember, this hand appears on this plaster wall, and it starts writing on the wall. Like, you've seen Freaky, but like, that's weird, right? Like, a hand is on the wall writing, and Belshazzar's freaking out. In fact, we're told that he gets so scared that he can't even stand. And people are leaving, and they're like, that's a party killer. Like, this is over. Like, can't do this. We're out. And no one can understand it. And finally, the queen says to him, hey, why don't you go get this cat Daniel? Like, he's getting a little old now, but like, he's pretty smart, and he's got this track record. Go get him. And Daniel's brought in, and he says to him, Belshazzar says to him, like, hey, if you'll interpret this, I'll make you the third most powerful in my kingdom. I mean, there's Nabonidus, and then there's me, and then there's you. So he doesn't even know Nabonidus is even dead yet. Like, come on, like, I'll make you third. And here's what Daniel says to him in chapter 5. Then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. And I have to think that at this point, Daniel's going, again. Like, God is once again reinforcing that he is sovereign over the kingdoms of the world, and he gives them to anyone he wishes. And he says this, your majesty, the Most High, gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. kind of a big deal, this Nebuchadnezzar, but he understood it came from God. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High, God, is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth, and he sets them over anyone he wishes. I mean, can't you just hear him going, come on, Belshazzar, you should know this. Like there's plaques, there's paintings, it's in your literature. Like your dad told you this story, you should know this story. But he refuses. And he continues, but you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you've set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles. Your wives and your concubines drink wine from them. You praise the gods of silver, of gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand, the freaky, like, woo, hand. He sent the hand. And he wrote the inscription, and this is what the inscription means. Here's what was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parson. Belshazzar, here's what it means. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Implication, your leadership is on loan. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Implication, you're accountable. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given up to the Medes and the Persians. Implication, it's over. Your leadership was temporary. Your leadership was a stewardship. It's temporary. And you're accountable. And in fact, what we know historically was that very night, Cyrus, king of Persia, who was no fool, the river Euphrates entered and exited the city of Babylon. He rerouted the river, which dropped the water level of the river as it exited and entered and exited the city walls, which allowed the Persian army to slip underneath the wall into the city. They opened the city up from the inside, and that very night, Belshazzar was killed. Belshazzar, God wanted you to know one thing, that every ounce of influence you have, every ounce of resource and power and ability and skill. See, the temptation is to think, I've got it because of how hard I worked. I've got it because I've been at it for 40 years. I've got it because of who my daddy was. I've got it because I'm the smartest. I got it because I was here first. I got it because she gave it to me. And God goes, yeah. All that stuff, we have to keep all that stuff in tension. But at the end of the day, your leadership was given to you. It's on loan, and you're accountable. And it's so easy to read the stories of Daniel and think, oh yeah, those people, they had lots of responsibility. And as we look in the mirror, we miss the fact that we're parents, and we're a spouse, and we're grandparents, and we're employees, and we're community members, and we teach kids on Sunday mornings, and we play in the band. It's so easy to go, I'm not a leader. And yet God goes, no. You are. And so it leads to this question, and it's just the one incredibly weighty question that I have for you as we kind of start this leadership conversation, and it's simply this, like, where's your power? What power do you possess? What influence do you have? Listen, God doesn't want to hear, yeah, but I was just an assistant. That's a moot point. What power do you possess? See, this can become a really weighty thing, or it can become a really freeing thing. Because what that means is you are where you are. You do what you do. You possess the job that you possess and the skills and the resources you possess. You could either say that you could explain those in very human terms, or you could reconcile what's being said here to Daniel through Daniel, and that's simply this. You are where you are because God put you there. And we push back on that and we go, wait a minute, I thought I was here because I worked so hard. I thought I was here because I'm the fourth generation of people who did that in my family. I thought I was here, and you fill in the blank. And God goes, yeah. Somehow all that has to be held in tension with the fact that whatever skill, whatever job, whatever relationships, whatever influence, whatever power you have, it was given to you. And it's on loan. Because you know what? If you get hit by a truck tomorrow, we'll have a really sad funeral. And a week later, someone will fill that spot. You're accountable for what you do with it. What power do you possess? See, I think when we get to this place, the natural question is, okay, so what in the world do I do with this? And what do I do with the influence and the power that I have? And I think the answer is you get out of bed every morning and you crawl onto your knees and you say, God, the kingdoms of the world belong to you. And you give them to whomever you please. God, leadership is a stewardship. I'm stewarding lots of it. And I'm accountable. Now, some of you, this is a giant leap. Maybe because you've been sitting around church for a while and haven't made a commitment. Maybe because this is the first time you've stepped into this conversation for a while. Maybe you've been teasing God with your life and you're not sure what to do with the Jesus thing. I understand that to really apply this is a giant leap. And yet maybe this is the morning to do just that. To acknowledge maybe for the first time in your life, God, you are king over all of it. And I acknowledge that, and I need your help stewarding that. And before I pray, I just want to say this to those of you that like this would be the first time that you would step under that. Would you please let us know that you're doing that? Not so that we can add it to any kind of roster or counting. It's not like that. But via the info card or a conversation with the staff or an email or Skywriter, I don't care. But if you'd let us know, like we can help you take that ambition and turn it into a reality. We can help you translate that to the everyday minutia of your life as a spouse and a parent and an employee and a boss, a community member.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.